Hey everybody, it's Josh from the Houston chapter of the Extra Pint Crokinole Club. Today we're going to go over the new changes in the NCA. If you haven't heard, the big one is they are now going to allow tournaments from outside the NCA to participate in their standings. To do this, they restructured their point allotment system and created 3 separate tiers of tournaments with different point scales for each tier. So we're going to go ahead and review the new rules, and then you'll have my reaction. You can find links to all the documents you'll see in this video in the description below. So first we'll check out the new tier requirements for the new tour structure under the NCA. First, we're going to look at the Tier 1 events. These are the NCA's premier events, which are going to encompass the current NCA tour at the moment. Requires you submit an application. All these tours, you have to submit an application to the NCA. You'll have to submit your application and be approved before the start of the next NCA season you wish to participate in. You'll have to have a proven track record of organizing successful crokinole events, so it can't be your first event, and probably won't be your second either. One of the main prerequisites is that the cap on registrants cannot be lower than 40 people, and you'll need a venue that can handle at least that amount. Registration needs to be open at least 2 months before the start of the tournament, and the big one is that the 3 tournament editions prior to this must have averaged at least 10 players in singles or 8 players in doubles who finish in the top 30 in the NCA standings that season. No other NCA Tier 1 event will be scheduled in 3 weeks and 500 kilometers, it translates to about 310 miles, from any other Tier 1 event. So it sounds like you can have another Tier 1 event on the same day as one in Canada as long as you're in, say, Boston or New York City or something like that. Players will be allotted points in Tier 1 events based on the Tier 1 point structure. We'll go over that in just a little bit. Tier 2 events. Tier 2 events will comprise events that have been promoted following a successful Tier 3 edition. So you're going to have to run at least one Tier 3 before you'll be considered for Tier 2. If you're a Tier 1 that fails to meet the sanctioning application requirements above, if you would have been a Tier 1 but you're within 3 weeks or 500 kilometers, you're there. Highlights of the requirements of Tier 2. You have to submit your sanctioning application form and be approved by the committee at least 4 months out as opposed to a year for Tier 1. You have to have a cap not less than 30 people. You have to be open to registration at least 2 months prior to the tournament date, just like Tier 1. You have to meet all the criteria listed in Part 4 of the NCA's Tournament Tips and Standards document. We're going to go over that. Pay a sanctioning fee of $50 Canadian. That's about $38 American. It goes on to say a successful Tier 2 tournament may be considered for promotion to Tier 1. They say success is gauged by a combination of participant attendance, player experience, and a working relationship with the NCA. So officially, unlike at Tier 1 where you need NCA players involved in your tournament, there is no official skill requirement to be promoted to a Tier 2 tournament, although it is implied that some level of skill be present at the tournament. Tier 2 tournaments will be allotted the Tier 2 point scale, which again we'll be going over soon. Okay, Tier 3, most of the tournaments coming into this new point structure will be Tier 3 events. These events only require approval 2 months prior to the event date. You have to be only open for registration 1 month prior. The tournament must have at least 12 participants, which is not a lot. You get relief from Part 4 of the Tips and Tournament Standards document, although how much relief you're granted is going to be up to the committee. Only $25 Canadian, and your tournament will be operating under the Tier 3 point scale. Before we get to that, we'll take a look at the Tips and Standards document, of which adherence to is required for Tier 1 or Tier 2 status for your tournament. We're going to go right to the Part 4, which is the Tournament Standards. It's not that complicated of a document. It goes over the boards and the discs, requires that you be playing on a modern board. It talks about tables and chairs and the appropriate size. Talks about the playing area required, which may actually be the most difficult to comply with depending on where your tournament is. If it's in a bar or something and you don't have a lot of room, that might be an issue. Although they did say in the video that they will work with you on that. You're only allowed singles or doubles play. There's no one-on-one or anything crazy like that. It talks about round-robin formats that are available to you. The champion must be determined by a head-to-head match. NCA rules obviously apply. that goes over the timing of games. It's 8 minutes for round robin, and it gives you some leeway in doubles, 13 to 15 minutes for all doubles games. It then goes over the tie-breaking procedures depending on what kind of round robin you played. Yeah, none of this is particularly complicated. Most of you should be familiar with this. It simply provides a set of standards so everyone's participating on a level playing field. Okay, here it is, the new NCA Tour point structure, divided into 3 tiers. Tier 1, basically the current NCA tournaments, as we talked about. It keeps its general structure, awarding 50 points for first place. The most significant change with regard to singles used to stop at 20 points. So if you finish below 25th, you were awarded 20 points, and you were awarded 20 points if you were 26th place or if you were in 50th place. Now they've changed that, and the scale is linear all the way down from 5th place at 41 points to 45th and below, where you'll receive 1 point. They are big changes in the way they score doubles. The winner still gets 50, but they have changed it up completely. The argument on the video explanation being that there generally aren't as many teams or players in doubles tournaments as there are in singles tournaments, so it's easier to do better in doubles or get a higher rank in doubles than it is in singles. So they start out at 50 as before. In singles, you would drop 3 points to 47. In doubles, you're now dropping 5 points to 45. After that, there's a 4-point drop to 41. And every other position after that drops by 2 points until you bottom out in 23rd position. And everyone below that will also receive 1 point. The Tier 2 singles scale tops out at 40 points, but it follows the same progression as the Tier 1. Second place will drop 3 points, this time to 37. It's reduced by 2 until you get to 5th place at 31 points. It then goes linear, 1 for 1, down till you get to 35th position. Everyone finishing 35 or below will get 1 point. Tier 2 doubles mirrors that of Tier 1, with the exception it tops out at 40 points. It'll bottom out with 1 point at 18th position. Tier 3 on the single side tops out with 35 points, and it bottoms out at 30th with 1 point. And the Tier 3 doubles starts again 35, and it bottoms out at 1 point at 16th position. Other major changes announced by the NCA: the scores from your top 5 tournaments now will count toward your NCA ranking. It used to be 4. Now the top 5 tournaments you participate in will count toward your ranking. Other change, although minor, the NCA season used to start with the World Crokinole Championships in Tavistock. It's kind of like the Daytona 500. The biggest race was first. The biggest race will now be last. The season will now end with the World Championships in Tavistock in the beginning of June. To transition into that, the upcoming season, 2024-2025 season, will now both begin and end with the World Championships. So there'll be 2 World Championships that you'll have the opportunity to participate in a single season. Okay, so that's the big news from the NCA. From here on out, I'll be giving my opinion. My opinions are mine alone and do not reflect the opinions of Extra Pint Crokinole Club, its sponsors, affiliates, or so on. I can tell you that this is basically a positive review. I think that if its goal, as they were stating in the videos, is to bring the crokinole community together, people have been asking for a national or an international league or something to participate in. This is their effort to try to develop that, and I think that's a good thing. Speaking for Extra Pint Houston, we will be submitting an application for our Knights of Columbus singles tournament in Spring, Texas, and it's going to take place in November of 2024. Extra Pint Dallas has stated their intention to do the same for their tournament. That's going to be, I believe, in October. That's not ironed out yet. And next year, Texas State Championship, which should be hosted by the Dallas Club, that will also be applying for NCA sanctioning. The U.S. Open up in Voorheesville will likely remain a Tier 1 tournament. The Extra Pint singles tournament that takes place in the early part of the year, usually January or February, that tournament may actually qualify for Tier 2. Charleston's tournament may actually qualify for Tier 2. Brooklyn's hosting its first tournament later on this year. Baltimore just hosted a tournament. Denver just hosted a tournament. Cleveland and Pittsburgh hold tournaments, and we've got a bunch of new clubs now in Minneapolis, in Kansas City, in Alaska. Soki of Space Coast Crokinole just put on a tournament on a Carnival cruise ship. So clubs are popping up everywhere, and the game is growing like wildfire. So there's a bunch of tournaments popping up around the country that people will be able to participate in and earn themselves some NCA points. So this is a good first step in getting something approximating a North American or even world tour going. Although I do see several issues that are going to have to be addressed at some point in the near future. None of the individual changes made by the NCA are a problem on their own. Put them together, however, and you're going to have some unintended consequences. And I'm worried that the NCA may become a victim of its own success. First, just a minor criticism with reference to the doubles scale. I happen to agree that doubles shouldn't weigh as much as singles, just because you're only a quarter of the equation in a doubles tournament as opposed to half of it in a singles. Was that there isn't as many doubles teams competing as there are individuals competing in a singles tournament, and I don't really follow that logic. Looking at the NCAA Tour results from this year, Owen Sound only had 14 doubles teams playing competitive. The Ontario Doubles Crokinole Championship had 41 teams. The US Open has 42 teams playing. By comparison, the singles tournaments of Turtle Island had 22 and Chatham had 24. Because right now, as it stands, half the field in the Tier 1 US Open would only be getting 1 point. Anyway, that's small peanuts. It's their tour. They can do what they want. As for the major issues, start with the Tier 1 events criteria. Now, to qualify as a Tier 1 event, you have to have at least 10 players in singles or 8 players in doubles who finished in the top 30 in that year's NCA standings. Now, it's perfectly reasonable, even appropriate, to have a player skill requirement to be a Tier 1 event. My issue is that your placement in the NCA standings is the wrong metric to use for that determination, and I'll tell you why. NCA standings don't just measure skill, they also measure participation in the tour. Right now, there's only 30 of these people on the planet at any given time. All but 2 of them live in southern Ontario. The odds of attracting 10 of them to your tournament if you live outside of Michigan, Ohio, or New York are not realistic. Now that's going to change, and it's going to change quick, because your top 4 and soon to be top 5 events are going to go toward your ranking, so it's measuring your participation in addition to measuring your skill, and you're about to get a heck of a lot more participation. And this leads straight into my second concern, that the top of the point scale for Tier 2 and Tier 3 tournaments is way too high for not having a skill requirement. First place at Tier 2 is equivalent to 6th place at Tier 1. First place at Tier 3 is equivalent to 11 at Tier 1. Now, back in November, I got 3rd place in our Extra Pint Houston Knights of Columbus tournament. Assuming that'd be a Tier 3 tournament, I'd have earned 30 points. That's the equivalent of 16th place at Tier 1. That's A pool in the NCA. And I am not an A pool player. I am at best a C pool player. Yet I'm receiving more points than somebody who finished 17th against far superior competition. So my concern is, if this is as successful as we think it's going to be, you're going to get a whole bunch of guys and girls from the US, from Britain, Australia, Hungary, are going to overwhelm this thing and push all the Canadians out who aren't in the top 10. And you're not going to have enough players in the top 30 in Canada to meet their own criteria to conduct a Tier 1 tournament. In fact, those players in the top 30 may end up so spread out over the world that no one has more than 10 to conduct a Tier 1 tournament. And my concern isn't for us that are participating in this on the outside. My concern is for the Canadians themselves who aren't like in the top, 6 or 7 spots, because these guys were kind enough to invite us into their tour, and everyone's excited to participate. They were kind enough to invite us to their house party. I don't want to see their house get trashed, and I think that's a risk of that happening under the current system with the current point scale. The fatal flaw in the NCA system is that the point scale used in any given tournament is not proportional to the skill level of the players in that tournament. Luckily, the solution to this issue has already been solved. The sport of golf has come up with a solution to this a long time ago. I did a video on this a while back. Here's a brief recap of how the golf system works.
Golf has managed to figure out how to accurately rank people according to their performance, even though they're in different tours in different countries all over the planet. To explain how the process works in golf, each player earns a strokes gained rating. This is a performance rating that compares a golfer's performance to his peers. When a golfer enters a tournament, his strokes gained rating is converted into something called performance points. The performance points of all the golfers in the tournament are summed to produce a field rating. This field rating is the total number of ranking points that will be awarded during the tournament, with the winner being awarded approximately 18% of the total points. The second place player will earn 10% and exponentially less for third, fourth, fifth, and so on.
Back when I recorded the video, my idea was to substitute golf strokes gain rating, which is their performance metric, with the Crokinole players' ELO rating, which is used by chess players and other gaming communities to determine win probability. Unfortunately, the ELO rating system has proven too time-consuming and labor-intensive to implement. Ultimately, we need to assign a numerical value to a player's skill level in an objective way. So instead of assigning tiers to tournaments, I say we assign the tiers to the players themselves, based on their objective accomplishments, and then assign numerical values to those tiers. Here's an example of how this would work. I went back to the 2022-2023 NCA season and the current NCA season and recorded everyone that played in a tournament, more specifically a singles tournament. I didn't include doubles tournaments and I did not include the World Crokinole Championships, doubles or singles. I broke the players up into 5 tiers. Players who have won an NCA tournament. There were only 5 of them: Ray Beerling, Josh Carafilio, Andrew Hutchinson, Connor Ryman, and Justin Slater. I assigned 50 points to those guys because that's what you get when you win an NCA tournament. 22 people finish in the top quarter of an NCA tournament. That's not the A pool, that's the top quarter of the tournament. So if there were 24 people, these people finished in the top 6. If there was a 40-person tournament, that's the minimum requirement for Tier 1, that'd be the top 10. If you finish in the top 10, it's an average of 5th place, that's 41 points. Column C, players finish in the top half of a tournament. Again, not the B pool, just in the top half. They were assigned 31 points. Players who finished in the top 3/4 of a tournament, but not in the top half, they're in column D. They're assigned 21 points. Players who got below that only get 1 point. You don't get points for seal clubbing. I didn't bother making a list for Tier E. So I went and applied the golf method to the Turtle Island tournament. They were 3 players who were in column A with 50 points apiece. That's a total of 150 points from them. There were 10 players in column B that participated in that tournament. They're good for 410 points. 3 from C, 4 from D, 4 from E. A total of 24 players. Cumulative performance points, so to speak, are 741. 20% of those points would have been awarded to the first place player, 10% to the second, 7 to the third, and 6 for the fourth. And after that, there's a linear scale from 5th place down to 24th. The sum of all the points awarded add back up to 741. That would be the point distribution for the Turtle Island tournament if you ran it over again under the golf system. I applied the same methodology to the Elmira tournament, which had almost twice as many players, included all 5 previous champions from the last 2 years, and the 2024 Extra Pint Crokinole Singles tournament, which was a much smaller tournament, which only had a handful of players with NCA experience. Notice the far greater weight given to the 1,462-point Elmira tournament. We had 47 players in it, most of which were experienced NCA players. And the Extra Pint Singles tournament, which only had a handful, was only worth a total of 258 points. In other words, the point scales at each tournament are objectively reflective of the skill level present at each tournament. This makes the system fair. No longer will it be possible for an inferior player playing inferior competition to outrank a superior player playing superior competition. This will allow the NCA Tour, the UK Tour, the Texas Tour, the soon-to-be East Coast Tour, all to run their separate and unique individual circuits, using the point scales of their choosing while simultaneously participating with everyone else on an even playing field. Again, this is how it's done in golf. If you're on the European Tour, you get points on the European Tour. You're not awarded points simultaneously on the PGA Tour. You are awarded points in the official World Golf Rankings along with players from about a dozen other tours from around the world. Just to be clear, this is not a final proposal. I'm not proposing there should only be 5 tiers, that these are the criteria for each tier and these are the points that should be allotted for each tier. All that's up for debate and discussion. I am proposing that we use this framework for any interregional or inter-circuit competition going forward, as having a point allotment system that's objectively reflective of the skill level at each tournament is essential for fair play. So those are my thoughts on the matter. Think about it. Hope to see everybody at the US Open, and I'll see you all soon in the NCA points standings. Have a good one.